live.
Thanks, Alex. So welcome everybody to Office Hours number 14. We are probably having a pretty usual agenda today, apart from maybe the last 15 to 20 minutes, maybe slightly more, where we're going to try and focus on folks' thoughts on the arbitration charter, which has been posted on the forum for a while now, waiting for feedback by Brandon. So let's get into today's regular topics. ETHNode Watch, so there's a few things in here, nothing major. Open Ethereum has gone to 326. I don't think I reported that. I don't think that was last week. I think it was 5 days ago or so that they released that. There's nothing major to report back in terms of the change log. There's just one element in the change log, and it relates to the Berlin hard fork and some POA network, so nothing that I think is relevant to us for mainnet at least. TurboGeth is on to 502 alpha. That includes pre-London upgrade support, some RPC streaming support around debugging trace transactions and debug trace call. This, I believe, relates to memory leaks to do with those two pieces of, or those two features, but it's still deemed to be experimental at this point. And there's one more fix which may be, related to our sort of hopes and dreams of using Open Ethereum style trace filters on TurboGeth.
It works, apparently.
Wow, really?
I'm going to test it in 24 hours, I think.
Who is reporting that it works?
Their team, basically. But yeah,
okay, that's interesting.
It's matching Open Ethereum traces.
Very interesting.
Up to block like 11 million or something, but it should be in theory working fully. So yeah, I will have.
You're syncing something?
Not right now, because the TurboGeth node itself is still syncing. But yeah, it only adds like 30 gigs of storage, more than the usual.
That's really good news.
Yeah, so in about 24 hours, I'll have it fully synced up to Chainhead, and I'll let you know.
That is brilliant news. Okay, another piece of information, or some news really around TurboGeth. They've decided to do a rebrand, and the new name is going to be Aragon. And the motives behind that are sort of, those who've been around for a while know that TurboGeth is very past what a derivative of Geth at this point. But at face level, because you still have that Geth sort of relationship in the name, people make that assumption that it's just a sort of minor tweak on top of Geth. So that plus the introduction or some new progress on some sister projects around TurboGeth has motivated them to change the name. There's implementations of TurboGeth coming out in Rust and C++, and all of these implementations will be able to work with each other in terms of, you could take the database from the existing implementation, you could use it in the Rust implementation or the C++ implementation. So they're trying to tie all of this together, is my understanding, under one brand. In terms of what it means for us, nothing really. The repo, I believe the repo name may have changed already, or it's going to be changed very soon, but there's nothing else to consider right now. They're just going to be slowly moving over to the new brand. So TurboGeth will be called Aragon from now on. What else do we have here? A question that I wanted to bring up and see what people think about. I had an incident myself on my two main Open Ethereum nodes in the last few days, and I think that this happens in this manifests itself in various ways, but you'll often end up in these situations with maybe one of your nodes where there's an issue with the node, so it's not actually chinking up. It's not actually syncing up to the real chain head. But as far as the node itself is concerned, it's doing absolutely fine, and it thinks it's at the chain head. I had an incident where both of my Open Ethereum nodes ran out of pending connections because I had quite a low limit set for that. So they both ran out of pending connections, and both thought they were still operating correctly and that they were at the chain head. You could still send transactions, you could relay transactions via the nodes, which is very weird. I was interested to know, what are people doing in terms of checking or monitoring their nodes in a way that they aren't dependent on their own sort of reality around where the chain head is? Is anyone doing anything like polling Etherscan or some other type of third party, or limited third party, I guess, to make sure that their nodes are actually at the chain head? Because this is a pretty serious problem, right? If you don't know that you're at the chain head, that you're not at the chain head, and everything looks fine, and then potentially you're losing revenue because you've moved so far away from the actual chain head. Is anyone doing any interesting monitoring in that area? Or does anyone have any thoughts how you would monitor that? Alex, Chris, you must have some ideas.
Maybe Coin, but we can't hear him. So probably polling Etherscan is a decent idea, but then like either Etherscan or Infura or some other free service.
Yeah, I guess you want to try and minimize your dependence on consensus from other sources, right? So either you go down the route of limiting it to one, or do you try and take a mix of many in order to come to consensus on where the chain head is really at?
Yeah, I reckon a mix of many gives you more flexibility.
I forget there's an environment variable that you can pass to the graph node to set which instance keeps track of the chain head and does block ingestion. And I use a separate instance purely for block ingestion that I point towards, just hosted service, basically, not the graph hosted service, but hosted Ethereum nodes, because there are teams of people focused on that, and then all of the like heavy indexing work I do on my own nodes.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and that's quite interesting, Chris. I think another potential use for that type of model is something I've been thinking a lot about lately is lazy node configuration. So not using SSL within your own environment is kind of it's not good, right? Because if you're using these nodes to commit transactions, to broadcast transactions, then there's the possibility for someone to sniff the private key as you're using those nodes. And if those nodes are compromised, then I believe they can also they can compromise the key that was used on the node in the past. I've not looked into it in any great detail, but
they definitely can't sniff the private key from network traffic. That would
even with clear traffic, like a clear RPC node.
Yeah, because all that you're transmitting is a signature that authorizes the transaction, and that signature would have been generated, on the device in this, in the service when the transaction is signed. But once it's sent to the ETH node, the signature's useless.
Right. So where is the what's the word I'm looking for? Where's the security issue then with using, when I see people talk about, setting up a Geth node correctly from a security point of view, and often talking about, not using a clear RPC port, this type of stuff. Hey, Zorro, your mic's working.
Yeah, not sure of the kind of specific context or question, but I would guess that that is just referring to the fact that one should not expose an RPC endpoint on the public internet, because if somebody finds it, they can grief your node and DDoS it and whatever else. So RPC endpoints should either be kept, network internal, or if they're exposed on the public internet, they should be proxied, with some kind of client certificate auth, or, just some form of auth so that somebody can't just find it and connect to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think where you would need SSL is if you would use basic out to protect your RPC node. If you do that over plain HTTP, then anyone could sniff your basic out and therefore gain access to your RPC still. But other than that, I'm not seeing how. I mean, I've always put on the SSL, but I think it's more of a practice than actually the traffic is needing the kind of security. And in terms of the previous question, I'm planning to write a Prometheus exporter that parses the log, because in the log you can see the age of the last block that you have processed. My goal is to sort of export that to Prometheus.
So what were you pulling from the logs there? I missed that.
If you look in your logs and your Ether node is not at the chain head, it will say age 2 minutes 3 seconds, something like that. And I want to scrape that information and push that into Prometheus, basically.
Yeah, got it. Have you checked if the metrics endpoint on Open Ethereum provides that?
Yeah, I couldn't find it, and same with obviously I run BSC nodes, it's not a secret. I couldn't find the information there either. I've been trying to find information, but I cannot find it in the existing metrics.
Right, okay.
Hey Zoro, your mic was working. Can you keep pressing the letter D or whatever you said there and start talking?
Hello?
Yes,
Hello.
we can hear you. Hello.
Holy moly.
Welcome.
Do I have to keep hitting the letter D then when I talk?
You hold it down when you talk, it's push to talk.
See, okay. Now I get it. Oh,
I'm glad you got it working.
good.
But it would.
Go on, Chris.
No, go ahead, Jim. Sorry.
Okay, let's move on. Unless anybody has anything else they want to bring up around nodes, we can move on to Repo Watch. Oh, no Sebastian today. That's
yeah.
It's rare for him to miss office hours. Okay, I certainly have one thing that I wanted to bring up on Repo Watch just to get some more insight from Ford. Ford, I see that you put in a sort of an issue for a feature that we discussed last week around settling allocations on failed subgraphs. So I was interested to know when what the timescale might be like for getting something like that implemented.
Is the feature you're referring to the automatically close allocations when a subgraph fails?
That's the one, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think like earliest would be like next week. I don't think it's a huge amount of work, but there's other stuff I'm working on this week. There is another PR that's in flight that should be merged this week that adds some checks that are kind of similar. What it does is it makes sure that allocations don't get closed while a subgraph, basically it keeps allocations and subgraph deployments in alignment. So sometimes you can get in a case where your indexer decides to stop indexing a subgraph and close the allocation, but you need to make sure that you're continuing to index so that you can close that allocation. That's in flight. And then the additional check for failed subgraphs and immediately closing, that one will be next week or the week after.
Got it. Excellent. I don't have anything else on my list for PRs or the graph stack. Is there anything anyone else wants to talk about in that area?
One important thing that I'm working on this week is splitting out. Hopefully I'll have that this week, is splitting out the indexer agent and components between mainnet and testnet branches. This will allow us to iterate more quickly on mainnet. Right now, there's a bunch of changes I've done that haven't made it to mainnet because they're behind Scalar stuff. So things like the POI detection and some of the allocation management improvements and transaction management improvements. I'll be working to make sure that you guys can use that on mainnet.
So when you say splitting out components, are you talking about still within the umbrella of the indexer agent, but it's code that needs to be I don't know what the term is, but compartmentalized?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, cool.
Right now, it's pretty linked with like Scalar implementation and payments implementation, and those don't work the same across testnet and mainnet. So there's some complication there. So we're going to split out the two separate branches so they can proceed in parallel.
Excellent. Sounds good. Okay. Any other software related stuff people want to bring up? Right. So maybe let's have a little chat about the migration. So in terms of where we are, we're still in phase 1 at the moment, is my understanding, on the cusp of, moving into the next phase, while we have iterations on the graph stack happening on testnet. We have a cost model and performance workshop coming up tomorrow at 8 a.m. Pacific. That's with Zach on cost models and performance, so that should be a good one. As many of you as can attend would be great, so we can get the questions recorded as part of that session. I expect there's going to be a lot of questions coming out of that session. In terms of the testnet itself, last time I asked Janice, there were 10 indexers who are running the currently required version of the indexer stack, the graph node, and there is a consistent multiple thousands of QPS running on that network right now. Me personally, I've got a couple of indexers running on the same on the same WAN, and the throughput. We're seeing a lot of throughput in terms of queries per second, but it's very, very light queries that are being made right now. And Janice has suggested that this week they'll start chopping that up a bit and introducing maybe more complex queries. I would also personally like to see some dynamics around, signaling around, signaling on various different subgraphs and seeing how that impacts things in terms of your QPS, because I think most people right now are just syncing a couple of subgraphs. Although I believe all the mainnet subgraphs are now available on testnet. Is that correct, Alex?
Yes, I think I added everything. I'm not entirely sure if they actually work to be indexed, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm not personally indexing them right now, but it's good to have them on there so that we can I guess test index them as new ones come on. I guess last message on the testnet side of things is, 10 indexers is great, but we need more. So if you're not already on testnet, it would be great to see you there. If there's anyone out there who is struggling when it comes to the amount of time needed to get up and running on a testnet implementation, if you've just got hardware sitting there that you could use, you just don't have the time, please DM me or Alex, Indexer Payne, and we will help you guys get set up on the testnet as fast as possible and guide you through the process. That would be, forewarning, most likely that would be via a Docker implementation, because it's simply the fastest way to get up and running. Does anybody have any questions or anything they want to talk about around migration?
I can add there. Sorry, I'm hijacking your
Please,
topic, Jim.
Go ahead.
But I'll be sharing a message soon, but I can also highlight it here that given the good performance of the over 7,000 queries per second being sent during the testnet, and as you pointed out, that some of you are processing 2,000 queries per second in some of your indexers on the testnet, it's good to remind that there's going to be an upgrade on mainnet on the indexer components side of it, and it's going to be needed for everyone to upgrade in order to get the query fees. So let's keep an eye on that. So as the community is working on that, and of course, in particular, Janice will know that. It's probably going to come out next week, and it's going to be a process for upgrading. Interesting to start getting that tested in mainnet too, as we might move forward with the migration.
Thanks, Martin. That's a very good point. So one of the most useful outcomes of getting involved with the testnet is that the move from an upgrade from within testnet, where you're not too worried about breaking things, to upgrading within mainnet. We're now into serious business operations, guys. You can't afford to not be knowledgeable about the upgrade process in mainnet prior to it being announced, right? You need to be aware and knowledgeable. You need to have an engineer on your team who's been through the process of upgrading all the way from the version that's on mainnet right now to the testnet version, because there's a lot of changes since then. And if you follow the Indexers channel, the testnet channel, you'll see that there's been a lot of issues, especially if you're running bare metal. There's been a lot of issues with specific components, upgrading them correctly, not having permissions issues or pathing issues. You don't really want to have to be dealing with that for the first time on mainnet. It's going to cause you stress like you wouldn't believe. So we would love to see more of you on testnet, because at the end of the day, it's a huge benefit for you as well as a benefit for the data that can be captured, for Janice's use. Okay, so we're about half an hour in. Brandon should be joining us probably in about 15 minutes to discuss the charter. But I'm wondering if it's worth. I know that we had the discussion last week around the first fatal error on mainnet, but after having some discussions with people who were on that meeting, it seems like maybe there's some confusion around what the output of that meeting was in terms of what's going to happen. This morning I wrote my own thoughts down on paper around the fatal error and how I feel like we need to go through a process in order to decide whether or not that's something that should be, the type of event that should be covered in arbitration processes, whether people even see it as something that should be compensated or not. So maybe I might use these 15 minutes to just talk through what I've put to paper, and then try. Basically, my whole objective of putting it to paper is to try and get other people's opinion, to see what people think. So I'm just going to try and find that now and see if I can just quickly run through what I put to paper. Okay, so since this is a recorded event, this reads quite well. So it's something that people can come back and refer to, and includes an explanation of the problem as I see it. So I'm totally open to anyone correcting something if they feel I haven't got it right here. But I'll just blast through what I've put to paper here. So I have some concerns around the recent events surrounding the first subgraph fatal error on mainnet and the reality we face in terms of on-chain events, where stakeholders end up being punished monetarily for first-time incidents outside their scope or control or knowledge. To summarize the event, one of the 10 phase 1 migration subgraphs suffered a fatal indexing error at a specific block. A fatal indexing error means that the indexer allocating stake to that subgraph cannot continue syncing the subgraph. If the indexer didn't catch the issue within 2 epochs, I put a question mark beside that because it's a little bit more complex than that. But if the indexer didn't catch the issue within 2 epochs and manually settle the allocation, they were forced to settle the allocation with a 0 POI, which means they automatically forfeited all indexer rewards and query fees for the allocation. This occurred due to a bug in the subgraph rather than through the action of the indexer, yet the indexer is punished immediately. They lose the rewards accrued over the lifetime of the allocation. There is no arbitration over the application of this punishment. And I am, of course, impressing my own bias upon this action by referring to it as a punishment. The existing arbitration process specifically states an example of the fatal subgraph error, and that rewards must not be allocated for that allocation. And that's the end of section 9 in the current proposed charter. So why am I bringing this up? My biggest concern, in lieu of technology improvements to fix this specific situation, is that events like a subgraph fatal error, and moreover unexpected events that don't fit the existing model of arbitration, have no home currently within the process. And my concern is that that could, over time, if not addressed, breed contempt within the community due to a sense of unfair play, that a stakeholder might be economically punished despite acting in good faith. I can see these issues causing stakeholders to act differently in terms of risk within the protocol. For example, in the case of the fatal subgraph error, some indexers may decide to only support a small subset of subgraphs that they deem to be very stable, going against the in-protocol dynamics such as signal, total allocations, etc. So I feel like what I'm sort of deeming as the first fatal subgraph error on mainnet incident being a very good example of the type of dispute that falls outside the more programmatic nature of the arbitration process as it stands today, or as proposed today, and is a type of issue that can be solved with technology and thoughtful, directional community feedback to develop solutions that prevent such disputes from recurring. And I'm pulling that quote from something that Oliver Zorro wrote. We need to be accommodating, in my opinion, in officially recognizing such unexpected issues as the first fatal subgraph error on mainnet, lest future first-time issues breed ill will within the community and net negative incentive alignments within the protocol. So I've been talking for ages here. What I want to do is try and understand if other people are on the same page as me. Do you think these sort of events, which, the reality is, Chris said it last week, this is going to happen again and again, right? These incidents and other incidents that we don't know about yet. Do you feel like these fall under the eye of arbitration, both in terms of whether they're punished or whether they're compensated, whether we have a discussion about how to fix it for the future, or do they represent the price of playing the game and should or can be mitigated entirely through technology improvements, such as the one we discussed earlier around closing the fatal error allocations as soon as possible? So I know that's a lot to take in, but I know there's a lot of people here who are thinking about this. So I'm just going to pick somebody randomly and get their thoughts. So Chris, I'd like to hear what you have to say about this one.
I think that there are two issues, or we should try to separate the two issues here. One is what happens specifically with the subgraph, and then there's the kind of broader issue of how arbitration should fit into this kind of thing moving forward. Like the way that you ended that post, like, is this something that should be mitigated through software improvements and so on? I think the answer to that is most certainly yes, but that is antithetical to the idea that, arbitration needs to be better suited to dealing with like first time problems. So, like the scope, the kind of software improvement scope to prevent this issue didn't really exist, or certainly wasn't on anyone's radar that I'm aware of until the issue actually happened. And so in that sense, I think with respect to this specific issue of the failed subgraph and what I would, again, recognizing my own bias, much like you, I would agree that indexes were unfairly penalized here. I think all of us that indexed that subgraph were acting in good faith and seeking to support the network by indexing the subgraphs. And, with respect to that particular issue, I think that moving forward, that's, we can mitigate that through software improvements and generally, through awareness of the issue and taking mitigating actions. But moving forward, for similar issues where, there is not existing precedent, yeah, it's tricky. I mean, I don't think all issues would manifest in arbitration. And indeed, obviously, in this instance, arbitration would only be triggered if an invalid POI would be submitted.
Well, not necessarily, right? Anybody can submit a dispute for any POI, is my understanding, even a deemed correct one prior to arbitration. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I think you're right.
What I'm getting at there, Chris, is that, just if we assume for a minute that first time issues can be arbitrated via the process, then you could submit the POI that you're supposed to, in this case, a 0 POI, raise the dispute, and then go through the process of arbitration in order to both resolve the immediate issue, that specific issue around lost funds despite being acting in good faith, but then also, like Oliver Zorro has said before, or has put in some of his thoughts, it also kicks off a process of feedback into the community about how do we make sure that this doesn't happen again. Right. My concern is that we can focus on this one event and maybe fix it, but then we're going to have 20 other events in the next year where it's the same thing, and we don't have a proper process in place to deal with them.
Yeah, that makes sense. I agree. And the nature of this protocol is, that we're kind of pushing into uncharted territory in many senses, and indexes as a kind of ecosystem group are particularly at the front lines, at the front lines of this. And yeah, I would agree that we need better processes to make sure that we don't create the wrong incentives. Something that you highlighted in your post that I think is spot on, because I've had this feeling myself, is like, I am now hesitant to index Enzyme. And I really shouldn't be. Like, the nature of the Enzyme protocol is that it's extremely fast moving, and the nature of the on-chain environment with proxy contracts and everything else is extremely adversarial in terms of deterministic subgraph indexing. And as a result, I don't want to index a subgraph that is going to experience a high degree of updates and churn in order to keep up with the change on chain, because the risk of something going wrong, given enough time, is really high. And I don't think that Enzyme and generally subgraphs and subgraph developers should essentially be penalized for that, because indexers decide it's not worth indexing these subgraphs because of the potential downside. I think that's the misalignment of incentives.
Absolutely, I agree. And I know that Dave made a really great post on Discord about his thoughts on this, and that Fubi, I believe you're going to be writing something up at some point around sort of, I didn't catch the entire gist of it, but I guess you saw Dave's response, and you're going to be writing something up on the forums around this. You need to use push to talk, if maybe that's why I can't hear you.
Yes, correct. Yeah, definitely. I'm going to write a long forum post about this. I've already started collecting some bullet points for that forum post, but I'd like to take some time to really analyze this from a subgraph developer and protocol and dApp developer's perspective. I'm just listening in right now to get your guys' perspective on it from an indexer's point of view. In my opinion, long story short, I think it's beneficial for both sides if use cases like ours are not penalized, both for the indexer and for the subgraph developer, because right now, Chris, as you put it, you are now hesitant to index the Enzyme subgraph. And we are also hesitant to deploy new versions of our subgraph because of the cost of redeploying a version, and also hesitant to redeploy it simply because we are afraid of bugs, and that's not a nice position to be in. And just to give you a little bit of perspective on our subgraph, we have roughly 100 different event signatures that we are indexing. So you can just imagine the complexity of the subgraph that we are building here. And that's much different than just like a exchange subgraph like Uniswap, where you're just tracking some asset movements back and forth. Right. So definitely we need a solution for this, and I'll just take some time to write down that blog post and really collect my thoughts on that.
Brilliant. Thank you, Fubi.
I think an interesting, or something that I thought when Fubi was talking is like the current income the current income profile for indexes is heavily dominated by indexing rewards, and indexing rewards don't make that distinction, that subgraph complexity distinction. And so the economics as a result are pretty unfavorable for complex subgraphs. You could argue that when the query fee market really picks up, then the market will price in, the increased complexity of indexing a subgraph like Enzyme and potentially even the risk attached to that. But yeah, I don't think that we should create an environment that is, somewhat adversarial to subgraph developers or subgraphs that necessarily need to be complex, and kind of create this environment of apprehension around rolling out change for fear of breaking things. Or we need to appropriately reward participants for their contribution without creating this downside risk, unless of course it can be shown that there was negligence or incompetence in the operation. And obviously we have the existing POI and arbitration process to deal with that kind of thing. But certainly in the case where, actors are performing their duties in good faith, I don't think it's wise to create these disincentives.
So I got some thoughts, kind of piggybacking on the forum discussions. When I see what Jim and Konstantin described, there are two issues that I see. One actually speaks to the economics, the level of penalty and rewards that are being applied in the slashing process. But the other also speaks to what you also have discussed, when that happens. Part of me is thinking about the Apple App Store when they release new apps or updates to apps, they go through a quality assurance process. They want to make sure that apps have minimum quality. Such a process directly wouldn't necessarily apply or be applicable in our world, but is there a way for us to approximate that? So if you think, for example, when you make wallet transactions, it needs a number of validations before it is being confirmed. If we look at subgraphs in a way where we say we need to have a minimum number of successful allocation under our belt before slashing even applies in the first place. So say 10 successful allocations. And you say that if independent indexers have able to successfully close out these allocations 10 times, only at the 11th time would slashing rules kick in, but not before that, because we're saying that the first 10 is essentially part of us verifying whether the subgraph actually works and has minimum quality.
I guess that's feedback for you, Fubi.
Yeah, I've been thinking about something similar. So you can never know if a subgraph is going to work in the future just by looking at whether it has indexed onto the chain head, right? Because in this case, for instance, in case of our failure that we saw last week, the subgraph was running fine, but then we ran a migration on the protocol, and then we reached into an event that then triggered that bug and subsequently the subgraph failure, right? So maybe, yeah, really, I'd like to really take some time to think this through also from our side. I think there are maybe some options, and I think at least from our point of view, it would be fine also if like the initial risk of syncing up to chain head was something that the subgraph developers would be taking. Yeah, I don't know. It's tough. I think maybe one way for me to have a better angle on this is to actually join the testnet and become an indexer myself to understand better also your guys' point of view.
Absolutely. Make sure you reach out to me or Alex if that's something you want to do, so we can help you get set up quick.
I would like to add that.
Go ahead, Slim.
I think it would be challenging to find a way where the subgraph developer was responsible for the first, like, say, 10 epochs or 10 allocations or 10 or the first part of the subgraph, because you can also all of the subgraphs that get deployed, all the versions will be subgraphs of their own, and you could imagine other developers wanting to use an older version of, say, Uniswap, for example, and signal on it and want to use the data for themselves. And still the subgraph developer would be Uniswap, but they would be the ones that are signaling and wanting to use the data. So it would be really complicated to have somebody be responsible for that data then, or that subgraph.
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be so many of these edge cases, right? There's unique subgraph use cases that whatever solution we put in place genuinely needs to try and be a generic solution that can support all of them. Otherwise, we end up collapsing in on a certain subset of subgraphs that might not relate at all to signal or total allocations per subgraph.
It's also a really fluid issue. There are subgraphs that are very simple but produce a lot of data and are very unoptimized and take a long time to synchronize. So if they fail despite being so simple, I would be angry as an indexer, because the complexity of the subgraph is fairly simple. It was really expensive to synchronize it, and then suddenly it fails just to negligence. And then there are other subgraphs which are really complex, don't produce that much data, actually sync fairly quickly compared to other subgraphs. And then if they fail, I don't know. They shouldn't all be treated equally, if you know what I mean.
Got it. Yeah. I see Brandon's joined us. Welcome, Brandon. And Brandon, are you able to talk? I want to make sure you're up and running before I steer the conversation a bit more. You're probably going to need to turn push to talk on in the Discord voice settings and bind a key so that you press the key to talk.
Wouldn't it make more sense to think in a direction of if at any given point in time X amount or X percentage of indexer report a problem with a specific subgraph, that it gets exempt from slashing rules, because the bug can happen at any time. It doesn't need to be that, okay, it was an update and something is going wrong, or it's just been started now and it goes wrong in epoch. I don't know how much. It can a problem can arise at any time. So maybe it's more a question of if X amount of the indexers who are indexing it report and confirm a problem. More to think in those sort of lines.
Yeah.
Hey, can you guys hear me now?
Yeah. Hi, Brandon.
I joined late on this topic. I joined for another one, but I guess I'll add some 2 cents on this. Is that I think there's a lot more we can do here on the tooling side as well for indexers. So, and for subgraph developers for that matter. Like, I think it should be a lot easier to tell statically whether a subgraph has a bug in it, right? Like if there's unhandled error cases that for some data that's coming from the chain or something like that. There's plenty of like statically typed like functional languages that kind of give those sorts of guarantees. The other thing here is we have an experimental feature, which I'm blanking on the name of it right now, but basically one that allows mapping errors to be logged but ignored. So like for the mapping that fails, the subgraph carries on working. And then that becomes actually part of the subgraph state, so that people querying the subgraph can see, hey, this mapping failed, on block, 1 million, but otherwise the subgraph is still considered to be, working and, progressing as normal. So I think both of those things could help here.
Yeah, sounds interesting. We've only have 5 minutes left, guys, so I just want to try and steer the conversation a little bit away from the solution to the first fatal error incident, or rather the solutions to that incident. And I would like to hear more opinions, like I was asking at the end of that piece that I wrote on the charter proposal feedback. Do people believe, or do people have thoughts on whether or not something like a fatal error and the rewards that are lost through that fatal error, I'm repeating this because Brandon wasn't here, but the rewards that are lost, the query fees that are lost through that zeroing of a POI should be the type of incident, so I'm calling them sort of first of incidents on mainnet, should be officially going through the charter process with some kind of output that is around the solution, and potentially compensating for where the stakeholder, in this case an indexer, has acted in good faith but has been punished because they've immediately lost the query fees and the indexing fees. I hope that makes sense. Brandon, did you pick up enough there from that to understand what I'm asking?
Yeah, if I understand correctly, the question is for subgraphs that fail, should indexers have some vector for continuing to receive indexing rewards on them, perhaps by reporting the failed state of the subgraph or some other activity related to that? Is that right?
Yeah, so today, arbitration is primarily about stake and slashing, right? In this incident, which is a first type of, right, for us on mainnet, that doesn't really fit into the charter as it stands today. In fact, the charter says in section 9 that you'll lose your fees and your rewards because you've had to zero POI and allocation. What we're trying to do here is understand if that incident could fit into a proposed charter so that you submit the POI, and then you go through the arbitration process, and part of it is explaining what happened, and not just saying whether or not you get slashed because of the 0 POI, but also making a consideration for the lost rewards and fees.
If you close with 0 POI, you automatically lose those rewards, and the only contract that is able to mint tokens is the staking contract. So
I understand that there's a technical limitation. I'm interested in people's opinions. Just put aside that maybe we can do it, that we assume that we could do it. Does that work? Does that fit within what people think is the framework of a arbitration charter?
Well, so I guess the question here is like, so let's say indexers have done the work up until a certain block, and then the subgraph fails. And so the idea that you're proposing, I think, if I understand correctly, is that you want them to continue being able to collect indexing rewards because they've done the work and the subgraph failed through no fault of their own. I would even if we enabled that, which I don't think is necessarily a terrible idea, and that could be some of the charter where we say, hey, there's some POI that you submit when a subgraph is broken that basically just allows you to collect indexing rewards on quote unquote broken subgraph. I guess I would expect the subgraph developer to unsignal on that subgraph pretty shortly after, because now they're effectively paying to index a subgraph that is useless to them. So even if we enable something like that, I wouldn't expect there to be like long-term sustained rewards.
Oh no,
on that
no.
subgraph.
Where this ends, and I feel like it ends. Well, no. So we're getting into too much of the detail, but I'm not suggesting that it goes to the continuation of the last allocation on that subgraph. There needs to be some point of time where it stops. I 100% agree with that. I guess the question is, does this fit into the philosophy of the arbitration charter? Which to me, it sounds like you're in agreement that it potentially could.
Yeah, I think I'd need to understand the concrete proposal a little bit better, but I think these things that are sort of norm setting that are like outside the protocol logic itself, I think is certainly the purview of the arbitration charter. Since we only have a minute left, I guess I could just put a plug in that we do have a forum thread going for this that Zoro and another indexer has been pretty active on, and so I'd encourage you guys to share these ideas here, and we can maybe take them offline.
I've posted the link to the forum post in the chat room. Brandon, for your information, I made a post on it this morning, which is what we've basically just talked about for the last 30 minutes, so that you'll get the gist of what I think of what I'm thinking about from that post.
Perfect. Yeah, I look forward to checking it out.
Is there anything else critical around this topic that anyone wants to tag on before we finish? Because remember, this is recorded. It's a good opportunity to explain your thoughts and put them to paper if anyone wants to before we close off.
Yeah, there's also the fact that in these situations, the subgraph developer ends up paying a lot of money to fix their problems. So we need to find a way around that as well, not just the indexing side.
Absolutely. This is not just about indexing. I was very specific when I wrote that post and tried to use the term stakeholder, by which it could be anyone within the system that's suffering from these types of problems. I totally agree. The solution needs to be all-encompassing and not be punitive to specific groups.
Yeah, we've been talking about this a lot internally at Edge&Node, and the trade-off space here is that the curation tax is there to prevent certain classes of economic attacks. It's also there to protect the indexers, right? Like indexing a subgraph is a pretty large task, and so there needs to be some sort of cost in coordinating the resources of indexers in the network, because we don't want people to just get indexers indexing useless subgraphs and then rug pulling them minutes later. But we also need to balance that with the considerations of like honest subgraph developers that are sort of acting in best faith in the network. It shouldn't be too onerous or expensive to interact with the network. And I think finding that trade-off is something that's going to be an ongoing conversation and probably an ongoing topic of research.
I believe the subgraph developers signaling on that subgraph themselves, on that subgraph by name, not a particular IPFS hash, should be signal enough that they are committed to running that subgraph and maintaining and ensuring its quality over a longer period, even following critical failure like the one we saw here. We are committed to fixing it. So penalizing us for redeploying a new version of that shouldn't really be the case either. And yeah, I appreciate that you're not looking at it just from the indexes side of the thing. And yeah, we'll figure this out together.
I agree with that. The intention of the mechanism was definitely not to be punitive to honest subgraph developers that are acting in good faith. And so I think there could be some calibration there. But even, for the scenario you described, like you could imagine an attacker, creating a named subgraph, signaling on it, and just repeatedly upgrading their subgraph, right, to get indexers to index useless subgraphs and then kind of rug pull them, put them on something completely different. Now you could argue that subgraph, named subgraph, would develop, poor reputation, and so you could argue that there's maybe like these sort of extra protocol signals that indexers could incorporate into their decision making. That's certainly in the design space. As much as possible, we try and have like harder like economic guarantees around these things, but that's something we could consider if we needed to find ways to like soften the impact of these taxes and prevention mechanisms for economic attacks on honest stakeholders.
Okay, guys, we've Brandon.
Oh yeah, sorry. I was going to say I have to drop for another call, but it sounds like you're wrapping it up, anyways.
Yeah, we're 4 minutes over. Thank you, everybody, for participating today, especially everyone who has put their thoughts into discussion. We'll see you next week for Office Hours 15. Thanks. Bye.
Goodbye.
Thanks, y'all.
Thanks, guys.